The mattress at the church shelter sagged like an old swing, and every time I turned my body, the springs squeaked loud enough to wake the woman in the cot beside me. I stared at the cracked ceiling above, watching shadows from the single hallway bulb stretch like thin fingers across the plaster. I tried to remember the sound of my own bedroom, the soft ticking of the clock on the nightstand, the faint hum of the heater in winter. But my little lakeside home in Burlington was gone, burned to the ground in September when faulty wiring sparked through the kitchen. The firemen had been kind, but kindness didn't rebuild walls or replace 40 years of memories. Insurance adjusters spoke in clipped voices about processing delays. By the time I realized nothing was coming soon, I had already been staying with my son Daniel and his wife Claire for 2 weeks. At first Daniel made it sound like an act of love. "Of course you can stay with us, Mom, until you get back on your feet." Claire even put fresh sheets on the guest bed. I thought maybe, just maybe, we grow closer in this strange season of my life. But temporary comfort soured quickly. Claire started leaving chore lists on the kitchen counter, as if I were an intruder paying rent and tasks. Daniel came home late, sighing about grocery bills and the cost of heating. One morning as I made coffee, I found a note taped to the fridge in Claire's neat handwriting. "Please limit laundry to once a week. Utilities are high." I folded the note into my pocket and said nothing. By the end of the month, Daniel sat across from me at the kitchen table, his hands folded tight, voice firm. "Mom, we're busy with the twins with work. The shelter has room. Just stay there a little longer until everything is sorted. You understand, right?" I understood more than he realized. I understood I had become an inconvenience. I understood that family love, the kind I thought was unbreakable, could vanish the moment it required sacrifice. Now in the shelter I wrapped my coat tighter, my diary pressed to my chest. I wrote by flashlight. Invisible. Unwanted. Discarded. The words cut, but they were honest. Outside, Vermont's autumn wind rattled the bare branches against the window. The church bell tolled midnight, and the other women stirred in restless sleep. I lay there listening, wondering if this was how my life would end. Fading into silence, tucked in the corner of a shelter, remembered only as someone too small to matter. Morning at the shelter was always the same. The clang of pots in the kitchen downstairs, the low hum of whispered prayers, the shuffle of worn sneakers on linoleum floors. I packed my few things into the second-hand tote bag I carried everywhere now and walked the 5 blocks to the public library, the one place where silence felt like peace instead of punishment. I signed my name on the visitor sheet and took my usual seat at the row of public computers. My fingers hovered over the keyboard as I opened yet another application for janitorial work. It was humiliating to think that at 64, after a lifetime of careful living, I was reduced to begging for minimum wage shifts just to afford rent on some dingy studio. That was when I saw it. An unread email, subject line, "Estate of Eleanor Marlowe. Immediate contact requested." For a moment I thought it was a scam. I almost deleted it. But something about the sender, Harper and Westfield, attorneys at law, Providence, Rhode Island, looked too formal to be another cruel trick. I clicked. "Dear Ms. Margaret Hollis, we have been attempting to locate you regarding the estate of your late cousin, Eleanor Marlowe. You have been named sole beneficiary in her final will. Please contact our office immediately to discuss the transfer of assets." I read it once, then twice. My pulse drummed in my ears. Eleanor. My mother's niece, the cousin who left Vermont decades ago to paint in Providence, who sent Christmas cards until the mid-90s and then seemed to vanish into her work. I hadn't spoken to her in nearly 30 years. I whispered her name like a forgotten prayer. Could it be real? With trembling hands, I dialed the number at the bottom of the email. "Harper and Westfield, this is Mr. Duncan." The man's voice was calm, professional. I gave him my name. Silence hummed at the other end then. "Yes, Miss Hollis. We've been waiting for your call. Eleanor Marlowe left you her entire estate, her Victorian property in Providence, her art collection, and investment accounts totaling over $1.4 million. The world tilted. My vision blurred, and I gripped the desk edge to keep from sliding out of the chair. But before relief could take root, Mr. Duncan cleared his throat. "I should also inform you, Miss Hollis, that the will is being contested by a relative named Victor Kane. He is claiming you are unfit and estranged. We'll need your presence in Providence as soon as possible." I hung up the phone with shaking fingers, the shelter walls pressing closer in memory. For months I had been invisible. But now? My name was inked into a fortune, and a fight I never saw coming. The bus ride from Burlington to Providence stretched over 10 gray hours, each mile carrying me farther from the shelter cots and closer to something I couldn't yet believe belonged to me. I pressed my forehead against the window, watching the hills of Vermont flatten into Massachusetts highways, then into Rhode Island streets lined with bare maples and salt-stained sidewalks. My tote bag rested on my lap, heavy not with possessions but with the weight of possibility. When the driver called, "Downtown Providence," I stepped onto the cold pavement and felt the city's hum under my shoes. Mr. Duncan, the attorney, was waiting in a slate-gray sedan. He looked younger than his voice had sounded, his suit too sharp for the damp December air. "Miss Hollis?" he asked, extending a hand. I nodded, unsure whether to smile or cry. The drive to the house was quiet, save for the sound of tires hissing over wet streets. When the sedan finally turned onto a narrow lane lined with sagging Victorian homes, my breath caught. At the end of the block stood Eleanor's house. It loomed like a forgotten queen, 3 stories of weathered brick and ivy that clawed across cracked stained glass windows. A turret curled upward against the sky, and the porch sagged slightly, its paint peeling in long strips. Yet beneath the neglect it was magnificent. My throat tightened. This was supposed to be mine? Inside, the air smelled of old cedar and linseed oil. Dust motes floated in the slanted light that broke through high windows. Paintings leaned against walls, half covered in sheets. Canvases cluttered the hallway, some splashed with colors so vivid, I felt the pulse of Eleanor's hand still in them. Mr. Duncan guided me into the parlor, where boxes of documents sat stacked neatly. "These are her estate papers," he explained. "We'll need to go through them carefully. But there's another matter." He slid a file across the table. The name in bold on the first page, Victor Kane. "Mr. Kane claims Eleanor was pressured or confused in naming you sole heir. He's arguing she meant to divide the estate. He's already filed a petition with the probate court." My stomach twisted. I hadn't spoken to Eleanor in decades. How could I defend myself against a man I didn't even know? As we toured the house, I trailed my fingers along the banister, the wood cool and steady. In the cellar, a draft whispered through stone walls. That was where I noticed it, a stack of wooden crates pushed into the corner, each sealed tight with rusted nails. One crate had a slip of paper stuck beneath the lid, scrawled in Eleanor's looping hand. "For Margaret. Trust what is hidden." I froze. Was this simply an artist's riddle? Or a secret my cousin had buried for me to find? That night, I couldn't sleep in the drafty guest room Eleanor once used for visiting artists. The wind rattled the stained glass windows, and every creak of the floorboards reminded me of the cellar and the words Eleanor had left. "For Margaret. Trust what is hidden." By dawn, curiosity outweighed fear. I pulled on my coat, grabbed a flashlight from Eleanor's old tool cabinet, and made my way down the narrow steps into the basement. The air was damp, tinged with the metallic scent of rust and earth. The crates stood silently in the corner, shadows swallowing their edges. With shaking hands, I pried at the lid of the first crate. The nails groaned in protest until, with a final snap, the wood split open. Inside were canvases wrapped in yellowed cloth. I unrolled the first one carefully, my breath catching as color spilled across the fabric, thick swirls of cobalt and crimson, strokes bold and alive. Even through the dust, I recognized the style. It was not Eleanor's. It was the hand of Thomas Radcliffe, a modernist painter whose works I had once seen hanging in a New York gallery decades ago. His pieces had sold for millions. How had they ended up in Eleanor's basement? Heart-pounding, I carried one upstairs into the kitchen light. The signature in the corner was unmistakable. Thomas Radcliffe, 1954. Authentic. By afternoon, Mr. Duncan had arranged for an appraiser to visit. The man, a wiry historian with spectacles perched at the tip of his nose, stared at the painting in stunned silence before whispering, This alone could fetch $3 million at auction. $3 million. The number felt impossible, like a lottery ticket I had never purchased. But the discovery carried danger. That evening, as I prepared tea, the sound of glass shattering echoed through the back porch. My heart seized. I crept to the doorway, flashlight raised like a weapon. A shadowy figure rifled through boxes near the cellar door. "Who's there?" My voice shook but held. The man bolted through the broken porch screen. In the glow of the streetlight I caught a glimpse, sharp jawline, long coat, eyes glinting with something between greed and rage. Victor Kane. The police came, called by the neighbors who had heard the crash. Victor had vanished into the night, leaving behind only footprints in the frost. "You'll need better locks," the officer advised. Better locks and stronger resolve. That night, I sat at Eleanor's desk and laid the Radcliffe painting across the surface. My hands trembled, not from fear but from a growing certainty. This house held more than inheritance. It held secrets Eleanor had hidden from me, treasures she trusted only I could protect. And for the first time in months, I felt something bloom inside my chest. Power. News travels fast when money is involved. I had told no one about the Radcliffe painting, not even Sharon, the neighbor who had kindly brought over a casserole the day after my arrival. But somehow Daniel knew. Perhaps it was whispers in Vermont, perhaps a slip from a relative who had heard about the will contest. Either way, 2 weeks after the break-in, my phone buzzed with his name. "Mom," he said brightly, as if we hadn't spoken in months. "Claire and I were just talking. We're worried about you down there all alone. The boys miss their grandmother. We thought we'd drive down for the weekend, make sure you're okay." His sudden warmth was like honey poured over vinegar. Sweet on the surface, sour beneath. They arrived Saturday evening, the twins bouncing out of the car with shouts of "Grandma." I held them, breathing in the scent of peanut butter and crayons, the innocence of children too young to understand the currents swirling around us. Dinner was tense. I'd set the table with Eleanor's china, hoping to soften the edges of the conversation I knew was coming. Claire, ever polite, complimented the meal twice before setting down her fork and folding her hands. "This house is impressive," she said, her gaze sweeping across the ornate wallpaper. "And the inheritance, well, we're happy for you. Truly. But family wealth should serve family needs." Daniel cleared his throat, nodding. "Claire's right, Mom. You've got more than enough now, and we're struggling with the mortgage, daycare for the twins, student loans, and with the economy the way it is, well, we could really use some help." There it was. The ask wrapped in the language of love. "How much help are you talking about?" I asked quietly. "Nothing unreasonable," Daniel replied, his tone measured. "Just enough to pay off the mortgage. Maybe set aside something for the twins' college funds. 50-60,000. To you it's a drop in the bucket." Claire leaned forward, her smile tight. "You'd still have plenty left. And it's not charity. It's family." I set down my glass, my hand steady though my chest felt heavy. "Family," I repeated. "When I was sleeping on a cot at the shelter, where was family then?" Daniel's face flushed. "That was temporary, Mom. We thought you needed space." "Space?" My voice cracked. "Space or distance?" The twins looked between us, sensing the storm. Claire reached for their hands. "We'll talk later," she whispered, but the damage was done. For the first time I saw it clearly, the truth Eleanor must have known. Love that only speaks when money enters the room is not love at all. The first court date came on a gray January morning. I wore the navy dress Eleanor had left in the upstairs closet. It seems loose but presentable, paired with the pearl pin my late husband once gave me. When I stepped into the probate courtroom, Victor Kane was already there, flanked by 2 lawyers with leather briefcases and smug expressions. His eyes met mine, cold and gleaming, as if daring me to believe I belonged in the same room. Judge Harrison, a stern man with silver hair, called the case. Mr. Duncan rose to speak on my behalf, laying out the will. Eleanor Marlowe had left her entire estate to me, in her own handwriting, signed and witnessed. Simple, clear. But Victor's lawyer leaned forward, lips curling. "Your Honor, we contend that Miss Hollis is not fit to manage such an estate. She was recently homeless, residing in a shelter in Vermont. We will present testimony that she suffers from impaired judgment and cannot handle the responsibility of significant assets." The words hit like a blow. My stomach knotted as the bailiff opened the side door. And then I saw him. Daniel. My son. He stepped forward with a paper in his hands, his shoulders squared like a soldier marching into battle. "I've submitted an affidavit," he said, his voice steady but stripped of warmth. "My mother lost her home and her stability. I don't believe she is capable of managing over $1 million. She needs oversight, perhaps a trust. For her own good. I couldn't breathe. Betrayal has a sound. It's the echo of your own blood rushing in your ears as your child hands you to the wolves. Mr. Duncan rose sharply. Your Honor, this is a smear. We have letters written by Miss Marlowe only months before her death, affirming her decision to name Miss Hollis as sole heir. These are not the words of confusion, but of certainty and love. He laid the letters before the judge, Eleanor's handwriting looping across the pages. Margaret is the only one who ever understood me. She is the only person I trust to preserve what I built. Silence filled the room. Judge Harrison lifted his gaze, his voice heavy with authority. This court finds no grounds to challenge the will. Miss Hollis is the rightful heir. The contest is dismissed. And as for the affidavit, family squabbles are regrettable, but they hold no legal weight here. The gavel struck final and sharp. Victor stormed out, fury in every step. Daniel remained seated, his eyes darting toward me, pleading for understanding. But I couldn't meet his gaze. I gathered Eleanor's letters, holding them like armor. I had walked into that courtroom fearing I might lose everything. Instead, I had gained something rarer, the undeniable proof that Eleanor's choice had been deliberate, that her love had been intentional, and the bitter knowledge that my own son had chosen greed over blood. The courthouse steps were slick with melting snow, the kind that soaks through shoes and chills you to the bone. I clutched Eleanor's letters close to my chest, their pages warm despite the wind. Behind me voices echoed, lawyers packing up, the shuffle of papers, the hollow slam of doors. Then I heard him. Mom, wait. Daniel jogged down the steps, his breath clouding the winter air. His tie hung loose, his expression caught between guilt and stubborn pride. For a moment I saw my boy again, the child who once clutched my hand crossing streets, who used to leave drawings on the fridge. But the man before me had just testified against his own mother. I only did it because we're drowning, he said, voice breaking. Claire's working double shifts. The twins need braces. We're behind on the mortgage. I thought if the court believed you needed help, they'd put it in a trust and you'd have to share. Don't you see? I was trying to save us. I stared at him, snowflakes catching in his hair, his eyes desperate. You were trying to save yourself, I said quietly, by sacrificing me. That's not fair, he snapped, his tone sharp now. You don't understand the pressure I'm under. You sit in that big house surrounded by paintings and money you didn't earn, while I break my back every day to provide for my family. The words stung, but beneath the sting came clarity. He didn't see me as family anymore, just as a solution, a resource to be tapped. I shook my head. Daniel, when I lost my home, when I slept on a cot in a shelter, you told me to stay quiet, to wait it out. You watched me disappear into silence and did nothing. And now that I've been given something, you show up to take it. That's not love. That's convenience. His mouth opened, but no words came. Finally he muttered, fine. Do what you want. But don't expect us to come running when you realize you're alone. I held his gaze, my voice steady. I've already been alone. And I survived. Alone is not as frightening as being surrounded by people who only see you as a burden. He turned away, shoulders rigid, and marched across the icy street to where Claire waited in the car. He didn't look back. I stood there a moment longer, then exhaled, releasing years of weight I hadn't known I still carried. That evening, back at the Victorian house, I opened every curtain, every window, and let the pale winter sun flood in. I hung my late husband's pocket watch above the fireplace, the tick steady and certain. For the first time since the fire, I felt the walls around me breathe. Not as Eleanor's house but as mine. A home reclaimed. A life no longer borrowed. Spring came slowly to Providence, soft green buds pushing through branches that had looked lifeless all winter. I rose early each morning, opening the windows wide to let fresh air chase the stale shadows from Eleanor's Victorian home. The place no longer felt haunted by grief. It felt alive, waiting for its new purpose. I found that purpose in a small notebook tucked inside Eleanor's desk. On its first page, written in her looping hand, were the words, "Art is not for storage. It's for saving lives." Those words lit a fire inside me. I met with Mr. Duncan again, not to discuss selling the paintings, but to create a foundation. Within weeks, we began the paperwork for the Eleanor Marlowe Fund, a scholarship for women over 50 starting over after loss, widows, divorcees, the homeless. Women like me. Neighbors came to help clean and repair the house. Sharon from next door painted the front porch while her grandson mowed the overgrown lawn. Local carpenters patched the roof. What had once been a private residence was transforming into a community arts and reading center. I could almost hear Eleanor's laughter in the halls, approving of every brushstroke and every book stacked on the shelves. On the day we opened the doors, a group of women gathered in the parlor. Some were nervous, clutching notebooks. Others came simply for company. I brewed coffee, set out plates of cookies, and told them this house was theirs as much as it was mine. The sound of their voices, low, warm, alive, filled the rooms in a way that money never could. One afternoon, I received a framed photo in the mail. The twins smiling wide, their front teeth missing. Daniel had scrawled a note on the back. "They miss you. We hope someday you'll forgive us." I traced their faces with my thumb. I would always love them. But love without respect is like a house without a foundation. It cannot stand. I placed the photo on a shelf in the parlor, among Eleanor's plants and Patricia's teacups. Family, yes. But not the center of my new world. As the sun dipped behind the rooftops, I stood on the porch, the neighborhood alive with the scent of lilacs. My heart was steady. For the first time in years, I was not clinging to survival, I was building a life. The lesson was clear. Dignity is not given by those who see you as a burden. It is reclaimed when you choose self-worth over conditional love. I turned the key in the lock of my front door, and stepped inside a home that no longer belonged to Eleanor, or even to fate. It belonged to me, and to the life I had finally claimed.